Some cases go cold and never get solved. But behind every silence, there's a story waiting to be told. Welcome to Cold Case Vault. We go deep into the unsolved, the forgotten, and the downright chilling. Let's open the file.
Welcome to Cold Case Vault, where we unlock the secrets buried deep in the shadows of justice. I'm Sam, and today we delve into one of the most controversial and mysterious cases in America today. The case of Karen Read, a woman accused of killing her police officer boyfriend, John O'Keefe. But was it a tragic accident, a calculated murder, or a desperate attempt by a system to silence one of its own?
A winter morning and a body in the snow.
It was a Saturday morning like any other, but colder. January 29th, 2022. The town of Canton, Massachusetts, quiet, suburban, blanketed in heavy snow from a storm that had rolled in overnight. Everything looked still, peaceful. But peace, as we're about to discover, can be deceptive. At 5:45 a.m., a 911 call comes in. The voice is panicked, slurred, desperate. It's Karen Read, a former financial analyst with no prior criminal record, reporting that her boyfriend, John O'Keefe, a well-known Boston police officer, is missing. She tells dispatchers something chilling. "He never came home. I dropped him off. He didn't come back. I don't know where he is." Not long after that call, Karen and a friend, Jennifer McCabe, begin retracing John's steps. And then they find him. Sound fade, snow crunching under boots, then a gasp. Lying face down in the snow, outside the home of fellow police officer Brian Albert, is John O'Keefe. He's unresponsive. His body is rigid. There's bruising on his face, blood near his nose. One of his eyes is swollen shut. He's not breathing. Emergency responders arrive, but it's too late. John O'Keefe, 46 years old, decorated officer, devoted uncle, is pronounced dead. What happened to him? The setting raises immediate questions. Why was he outside the house, in the snow, at 6 a.m.? Why didn't anyone inside hear or see anything? The house wasn't empty. Several off-duty officers were inside that night, drinking, laughing, celebrating, and yet no one noticed a man dying just outside the door? The snow tells part of the story, but only part. There were no drag marks, no signs that someone tried to help him or move him. His injuries? Blunt force trauma to the head. But oddly, no visible tire tracks, no shattered bones typical of a vehicle collision. Just the bruises and the silence. Investigators arrive. The first theory floated: Karen hit him with her SUV. They claim she may have backed into him while dropping him off, perhaps without realizing it. But almost immediately, that explanation felt too convenient. Neighbors question the timeline. One witness swears they saw John's body outside hours earlier, well before Karen was said to have discovered him. Security footage from nearby homes? Some mysteriously lost. And Karen herself? She was allegedly muttering strange things that morning. One of them reportedly being, I hit him, didn't I?" Was that guilt talking or confusion? Was it confession or coercion? As sunlight began creeping over the frosty rooftops of Canton, this quiet town found itself at the center of a national storm. By the end of that day, headlines were already circulating. Police officer found dead. Girlfriend under suspicion. But behind those headlines, behind the official narrative, was a story that would unravel into something deeper, darker, and potentially far more corrupt than anyone could imagine. And it all started with a man in the snow and a woman whose life would never be the same again.
Two narratives, one dead man.
Two people walk into the same night. Only one of them makes it back alive. Karen Red says she dropped John O'Keefe off at the home of his fellow officer, Brian Albert, sometime around midnight. They had drinks earlier in the evening, a few friends, maybe some tension, maybe not. Karen claims she watched him walk toward the house, then drove away. According to her, that was the last time she saw him alive. But the prosecution, they paint a very different picture. Their theory goes like this. Karen, angry, emotional, possibly drunk, drove John to the house. An argument erupts in the car. Words turn into rage. And then she reverses her Lexus SUV, hitting John with the rear bumper. She doesn't realize, or refuses to realize, that he's on the ground, injured. She drives off, leaving him to die in the cold. Sounds clear-cut? Maybe. But here's where it starts to fall apart. Let's start with the forensics. The alleged hit should have left tire tracks, blood spatter, maybe even skull fractures consistent with a vehicle collision. But there were none of those things, just bruises, mostly to the front of the face, and a wound behind the right ear, more like the blow from a blunt object than a car bumper. Experts also raise this. If John was hit and left lying there, why wasn't he discovered until hours later by Karen herself? Why didn't anyone inside the house see or hear anything? There were at least 5 people inside that house, all off-duty law enforcement or related to it. Are we supposed to believe no one saw a man dying feet from their door? Then there's Karen's behavior. She was heard repeating, "I hit him, I hit him, I hit him." Some took it as a confession, but her defense argues she was in shock, processing guilt, and repeating what others around her were suggesting. Because here's the thing, her friend, Jennifer McCabe, the same one who helped her search for John, allegedly Googled, "How long to die in cold?" hours before John was even found. The defense calls that a smoking gun. What was she trying to confirm? Did she know something she wasn't saying? And then the silence inside that house. Brian Albert, whose home John was supposedly walking into, has never spoken publicly about what happened that night. Neither have his family members who were inside. Witnesses say there were security cameras on the property, yet none of the footage from that night has ever been released. Some say it was lost. Others say it was deleted intentionally. Either way, a digital blackout the moment a man dies on your doorstep. Coincidence or cover-up? Now let's flip the script for a moment. What if Karen is telling the truth? What if John did make it inside that house? What if something happened there, something violent, something the others wanted to bury? A fight, a betrayal, a deadly accident. And what if Karen, imperfect as she may be, is not the killer, but the fall person, a way to deflect attention from something bigger? And so, 2 stories emerge. Story 1, a drunk, jealous girlfriend lashes out and makes a deadly mistake. Story 2, a man uncovers something dangerous inside his circle, and someone silences him for it. Only one of them can be true, and the deeper you dig, the harder it becomes to tell which story is more terrifying.
psychological portrait, Karen Reed.
To understand the events of that fateful night, when John O'Keefe was found dead outside the home of a fellow officer, we must first understand the woman at the center of it all, Karen Reed. The media portrays her as a woman caught in the heat of a tragic, possibly fatal mistake. A woman perhaps driven by jealousy, rage, or alcohol-fueled frustration. But is that who Karen truly is? Or is she something more complex? Someone trapped in a moment far beyond her control? The first layer. Karen's background. Karen was not someone you'd expect to see in a murder investigation. She was educated, stable, and appeared to have a good head on her shoulders. She graduated with a degree in finance, worked in the corporate world for years, and had a steady job. But like many people, Karen had a past that would later raise questions about her mental state. Her friends describe her as someone who could be intense, someone who cared deeply about the people she loved. But that intensity, while sometimes endearing, had a darker side. Her relationship with John O'Keefe was complex, to say the least. The dynamics of her relationship with John O'Keefe was everything Karen could have asked for. A charming, successful police officer, well-liked by his colleagues. But as with many relationships that appear perfect on the outside, there were cracks underneath. Karen was deeply attached to John. Too attached, perhaps. She'd text him frequently, wanting constant reassurance. She'd often expressed doubts about their future. Was he committed to her? And sometimes these texts became obsessive. There were jealousy issues. Texts revealed moments of suspicion, accusations, whether grounded or not, that John was unfaithful. In fact, at one point, Karen reportedly confronted him about potential infidelities. In some of those texts, there were words of love and affection that seemed desperate, almost clingy. But was it just anxiety, or was Karen struggling with something deeper? Signs of psychological strain. Karen wasn't just dealing with relationship issues. She was carrying a heavy emotional burden, one that she may not have fully understood herself. After years of trying to excel in a highly demanding career, she seemed to be burned out, losing touch with what truly mattered. Her friends recalled moments where Karen appeared to be on edge, unable to manage her emotions, volatile at times. And yet, she wasn't the type to open up about her struggles. Instead, she internalized her fears. Her insecurities festered. Now add a toxic relationship on top of that. Could it have been the perfect storm? An emotional breakdown? An outburst that led to a tragic and irreversible event? The night of John's death. Was it guilt or shock? Karen's actions after John's death have been dissected repeatedly by both defense and prosecution. The words she spoke, the way she spoke them, are critical in understanding what was going on inside her mind. When Karen called 911, she was in a state of panic. Her voice wavered. She was visibly distressed. But one of the most striking things she said was, "I hit him. I hit him. Didn't I?" Was this guilt? Was she confessing to something she believed she did? Or was it something else entirely? Could this simply have been the shock of seeing a man she loved, someone who was her entire world, dead at her feet, and her mind grasping for an explanation? At that moment, her words could be interpreted in two very different ways: a confession, or the desperate attempt to make sense of the senseless. Karen was clueless in many ways. She had no idea how her boyfriend ended up lying outside that house, cold and lifeless. But in her state of utter confusion, Was she subconsciously blaming herself for something she hadn't done? Is Karen Red innocent, or is she guilty of something deeper? There is no doubt that Karen Red was a woman who felt out of control that night. A woman who had perhaps pushed herself too far emotionally, too deep into a relationship fraught with tension and unresolved issues. Her behavior might suggest guilt. But can we really say guilt for a crime that she may not have committed was the only thing she felt? The bigger question remains, was Karen simply a victim of a tragic accident that spiraled out of control? Or was she a victim of a system that wanted her to take the fall for something far darker, far more insidious? Her mental state, torn between confusion, fear, and desperation, is what we must truly focus on. The mind is a complicated thing, and in high-stress moments, our brains process emotions in ways we cannot always understand. Did Karen snap because of years of pressure, or was she the pawn in a much larger game? The struggle within, guilt or manipulation. As the case goes to trial, the defense doesn't just paint Karen as a victim of circumstances. It presents her as a woman manipulated by the system, manipulated by her own emotions, by guilt, by those around her, maybe even the police officers who failed to come forward. And the prosecution? They believe her emotions were the driving force behind something darker. A woman in turmoil who may have crossed a line she could never return from. But the real question is, did Karen truly know what happened? Or did she simply believe something terrible had happened without being the perpetrator?
The science doesn't lie, or does it?
In every murder investigation, science is the ultimate authority. Or at least we like to think it is. Forensics, autopsies, blood spatter analysis, they can reveal truths no witness ever could. But what happens when the science doesn't match the story? When the evidence is either missing or doesn't align with the official narrative? The initial autopsy, questions raised. When John O'Keefe's body was found that morning, it didn't take long for forensic experts to perform an autopsy. The cause of death was clear: blunt force trauma to the head. But what wasn't clear, at least not at first, was how the injuries matched the story being told by the prosecution. Karen Red had been accused of hitting him with her SUV, backing up into him in a drunken rage. But the physical evidence didn't seem to support this. Tire marks? None. Blood spatter? None. Fractures from being hit by a car? Not really. What did they find instead? Bruising to the front of his face, mostly the nose, lips, and cheeks, consistent with a blow from a fist or a blunt object, but not a car. And then there was the wound behind the ear, a sharp contusion that didn't fit with the story of a car backing into him. That kind of injury, localized, precise, felt more like something that could have been inflicted with a heavy object. Forensic evidence, a deeper look. As the forensic team examined the scene further, questions about the crime scene itself began to surface. John's body had been found lying in the snow, rigid, unresponsive. But the position of his body raised a troubling question. Why was he lying face down in a relatively neat position without signs of a struggle? Normally, when someone is attacked or hit by a vehicle, the body moves. There should have been signs of someone trying to get up, crawl, or at least shift positions. But there was none. Instead, John was found as if he had fallen straight from a standing position. Some argued that the absence of drag marks or signs of movement indicated that he had been placed in that position after being injured. The mystery of the missing tire tracks. One of the most puzzling elements of this case was the absence of tire tracks around the area where John's body was found. Karen allegedly backed up her car into John, a theory that should have been easy to confirm with tire tracks in the snow. But the police found nothing, no tracks, no trace of a vehicle hitting him. The snow had been freshly fallen, with no signs of anyone trying to drive through it. This was a critical piece of evidence that couldn't be ignored. Could it be that the crime scene had been tampered with? Could someone have staged it, moving the body after the fact, in an effort to cover up what had truly happened? And then there were the footprints near the scene. Police found footprints leading away from John's body, heading toward Brian Albert's house, the very house he was supposed to have entered earlier that night. Those footprints seemed to tell a different story. Someone had walked away from the scene, but the only person who should have been there was Karen. And yet no one could explain who those footprints belonged to, or why they seemed to lead back to the house of another officer. The medical examiner's dilemma. As the case continued to unfold, the medical examiner found himself at a crossroads. The cause of death was clear: blunt force trauma. But the how, the manner in which John had been attacked, that remained elusive. The medical examiner's findings seemed to conflict with the idea that Karen had struck John with her car. The injuries didn't fit, and more importantly, the condition of his body didn't suggest a hit and run. Was the forensic evidence being ignored in favor of a more straightforward narrative? Some experts began to question if Karen Rudd had been wrongfully accused, or if perhaps the truth had been intentionally obscured by those who didn't want to look too closely. A new theory, the blunt force trauma. The more experts delved into the case, the more they questioned the original narrative. Could Karen's SUV have caused the injuries she was accused of inflicting? Number. But what if someone else, someone inside Brian Albert's house, had been responsible for those injuries? The injuries to John's face suggested a fist, but the wound behind his ear, that was different. That suggested the use of a heavy object, something more substantial than a mere fist. Could it have been a bottle, a heavy lamp, or perhaps even a blunt instrument that one of the officers inside Brian Albert's house had used? The pieces were slowly coming together, but the picture they painted wasn't one of a simple accident. The case for a staged crime scene. As the days went on, investigators began to suspect that the crime scene had been staged. Could it be that John had been attacked inside Brian Albert's house, and then his body moved, or perhaps dragged outside to the snowy yard, left to be discovered by Karen?
The blue wall, corruption or coincidence?
In every high-profile case involving law enforcement, there's a shadow that looms large, a shadow that some believe is the true killer. It's known as the blue wall of silence, a code of silence, an unspoken loyalty within the police force, where officers protect their own, no matter the cost. As the Karen Reed case unfolded, it didn't take long for whispers to spread. Whispers of a cover-up. Was the truth being hidden behind that blue wall? And if so, who was hiding what? Was there a conspiracy to protect the real perpetrator, someone within their own ranks? The role of Brian Albert, the silent witness. At the heart of this case lies Brian Albert, the officer whose home John O'Keefe was allegedly trying to reach that night. According to the timeline, John had been dropped off by Karen at around midnight. He was seen walking toward Brian Albert's house, but that's the last confirmed sighting of him before he was found dead hours later. What is critical here is the role Brian Albert plays, or rather, doesn't play, in the investigation. Brian has never publicly spoken about what happened that night. He has never been asked to testify under oath. In fact, many of the people in the house at the time of John's death have remained eerily silent. Why? The police, who were supposed to investigate the murder of one of their own, failed to question Brian. They failed to subpoena the house's security footage, which was crucial to understand what really happened that night. Is this a case of oversight, or is there something more sinister at play? Is it possible that Brian Albert and the others in the house were being protected by the blue wall? The evidence points to a startling conclusion. There is something off about the way this investigation has been handled, and it seems to involve more than just a lack of cooperation. It feels like deliberate obstruction, a pattern of silence. As the investigation progressed, certain witnesses started to raise suspicions. There were accounts of multiple officers who were present that night at Brian Albert's house, yet they didn't seem to be in a rush to speak. Even the family members of these officers remained tight-lipped. The prosecution claimed that Karen Red was the only person who had any motive to harm John. But as the story developed, more questions emerged about the interactions between John and the other officers that night. Had John uncovered something within the department that made him a target? What's telling is that no one inside Brian's house seemed to have noticed the chaos unfolding right outside their door. And here's where it gets murky. The police were involved, not just as witnesses, but as active participants in the investigation. And when law enforcement is the one investigating, can you trust them? The digital footprint, was it erased? The case became even more complicated when it was revealed that there were security cameras inside Brian Albert's house. Cameras that could have offered crucial evidence. But what happened to those cameras? The footage was never produced. The excuse? It was lost. A major element of the investigation, the very security cameras that could have verified Karen's story, vanished. And there's more. It came to light that the 911 call made by Karen Red wasn't the first. Before Karen called the authorities, a different person, someone who was allegedly at Brian Albert's house, had already made a call. But the details of that call were never fully revealed. Why wasn't this earlier call made public? The question of corruption. Now let's talk about something even more unsettling. The possibility of corruption within the police ranks. Karen Red's defense attorney quickly pointed out the absence of impartiality in the investigation. The police weren't just failing to investigate certain leads, they were actively hindering the investigation. From the missing footage to the lack of interviews with key witnesses, the case began to look more like a cover-up. But was it corruption or just a string of unfortunate coincidences? Could there have been a concerted effort to protect certain people, officers who might have been involved in John's death or knew something they didn't want to reveal? Could the investigation have been deliberately obstructed to prevent a scandal, a larger conspiracy? As investigators continued to dig deeper, they started to question whether this was just a tragic accident or the result of something far darker, something systemic. Could John have uncovered something hidden within the department, an affair, a misuse of power, or perhaps a corrupt deal? Something worth silencing? The closer authorities looked at Brian Albert's connections, the more disturbing the story became. Was the blue wall of silence meant to protect a corrupt officer, or was it meant to protect the whole department? In the end, the question remains, is the blue wall merely a code of loyalty that every police officer follows, or is it a cover-up for those who wish to hide the truth?
The Courtroom War and the secret that died.
After everything, the confusion, the questions, the layers of secrecy, the disappearing evidence, and the walls of silence, the question remains, who really killed John O'Keefe? Was it Karen Redd, the woman accused of murder? Or was it someone else, someone hidden behind the shadows of authority? And more importantly, why did the truth die with him? The aftermath. A life shattered. In the weeks and months after John O'Keefe's death, Karen Redd found herself not just in the courtroom, but in the court of public opinion. Her life, once filled with promise, now lay in tatters. She was accused of a crime she swore she didn't commit, but no matter how many times she tried to explain, no one seemed to listen. Her story, a story of a woman who found herself in the wrong place at the wrong time, overwhelmed by confusion and panic, fell on deaf ears. The prosecution's case against her was based on a single narrative: that Karen had been drunk, angry, and reckless. But that narrative ignored the deeper questions, the ones that could have shed light on the full truth. Why had John been outside in the snow that night? Why did the evidence paint a picture so different from the one presented in court? As Karen struggled to maintain her innocence, it became clear that the true killer was being protected by something far more dangerous than any single person. Could the blue wall of silence really be the shield keeping the truth from emerging? The cop, Brian Albert, and the missing link. At the center of this storm lies Brian Albert, the cop who was supposed to be a witness, but who became an enigma. Why didn't he speak up? Why didn't he share the information he surely must have known? It was Brian's house that John O'Keefe was allegedly trying to reach that night. It was his presence, along with his colleagues, that raised so many questions. Why was he so silent about the events of that night? Was he protecting Karen, or was there something more sinister at play? In the end, Brian Albert's silence spoke volumes. Was it loyalty to a fellow officer, or was it a calculated decision to keep the truth buried? And then there was the secret, the one that John O'Keefe had stumbled upon, the one that led to his tragic death. Was it an affair, a corruption scandal, or something else entirely? That secret died with John, and it seemed like it would never be uncovered. The final days, the last attempt for justice. As the case dragged on, new theories began to emerge, ones that placed Karen in a different light, ones that questioned the narrative set forth by the prosecution. What if the truth wasn't as simple as a drunken accident gone wrong? What if Karen wasn't the killer, but rather a woman caught in a web of lies, confusion, and betrayal? The deeper investigators dug, the more dark secrets began to emerge. Was Karen really guilty, or was she a scapegoat? Could it be that the real killer had used the chaos surrounding Karen to cover up their own tracks? There were whispers of police corruption, of officers protecting their own, and of a high-profile scandal that might have been the true cause of John's death. The more Karen's defense team dug, the more they found inconsistencies in the case against her. The missing evidence, the silent witnesses, the unexplained movements, it all pointed to something bigger than just a tragic accident. And as Karen's trial came to an end, the jury was left with more questions than answers. Could justice truly be served when the system itself might have been complicit in hiding the truth? The legacy of the case, a silent truth. As we look back at the events that unfolded, it's clear that justice was never truly served. The truth, that elusive thing we all search for, seems to have died with John O'Keefe. And with him, a life full of possibilities, a family left broken, and a mystery that will never be fully solved. The case of Karen Red will forever be tied to the question, who really killed John O'Keefe? Was it Karen? Or was it someone else? Someone whose secret was worth protecting? Someone willing to silence the truth at all costs? Karen Reed's life was irrevocably changed by the death of John, and the pursuit of justice will forever haunt her. And so, the mystery lingers in the shadows, unsolved, with only whispers remaining where once there was certainty. Perhaps the real murderer will never face the court. Perhaps the secret that died with John O'Keefe will remain locked in the past. But one thing is certain, some truths are too dangerous to uncover. Truth is a dangerous thing. It can be buried, fabricated, weaponized. But here, on Cold Case Vault, we keep digging until we find it. This was the Karen Reed Enigma. I'm Sam, and I'll see you next time.